Honor, my mother-in-law has been systematically looting the estate since the day my husband died. My brother-in-law's lawyer let the words hang in the air like smoke. We are requesting immediate appointment of an emergency conservator to secure all remaining assets before she can transfer anything else. My mother-in-law sat across the aisle in a dove-gray blazer she'd bought for the occasion. I could tell because the tags had left a faint crease at the collar. Her daughters, my husband's two sisters, flanked her like parentheses around a sentence that didn't quite add up. The younger one was already dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. Dry eyes, I'd noticed. The tissue was just something to hold. The judge looked at me over his reading glasses. He checked his notes. Ms. Alderton, you are the respondent. Do you wish to address the petition? I didn't stand up. I folded my hands on the table and said, Not yet, Your Honor. I'm waiting for someone. The courtroom went a little still. My brother-in-law's lawyer turned to look at me with the particular expression of a man who thinks he has already won and is trying to decide whether to be annoyed or amused. My mother-in-law's chin lifted exactly 1 centimeter. The rear doors opened. She was not what anyone expected. She was maybe 55, wearing a navy pantsuit that had been washed 1 too many times, carrying a canvas tote bag instead of a briefcase. She walked the center aisle like she'd been doing it her whole life, which, it turned out, she had. Your Honor. Her voice was flat, Midwestern, and completely without warmth. I'm representing the Fiduciary Services Division of Meridian Trust Company. We are successor trustee for the Alderton Family Revocable Trust, now irrevocable upon the death of the grantor. I have documentation. She reached into the tote bag and placed a sealed manila envelope on the clerk's desk. The judge picked it up. He read the header, he read the next paragraph, then he set it down and looked at my brother-in-law's lawyer the way you look at someone who has just walked confidently through a door you knew was locked. Counsel, he said, are you aware that the assets you're seeking to conserve were transferred into an irrevocable trust approximately 14 months prior to the decedent's death? My brother-in-law's lawyer blinked. The family was not notified of any such arrangement. We believe the decedent lacked capacity at the time of the certification of trust dates otherwise. My mother-in-law leaned over and grabbed her lawyer's arm. I watched the whispered exchange from across the room and thought about a Tuesday afternoon 14 months ago when my husband and I sat in a glass-walled office in downtown Columbus and signed our names while a notary pressed his seal into the paper. My husband had squeezed my hand on the way out. They won't see it coming, he'd said. He was smiling. He smiled a lot, even at the end. I had not told them. I had not told anyone. The judge was reading from the trust document now. He found the page he was looking for and cleared his throat. Article 7, Section D. No contest provision. Any beneficiary or heir who initiates, joins, or supports any legal action challenging the validity of this trust instrument, the competency of the grantor at the time of execution, or the authority of the successor trustee, shall forfeit their entire beneficial interest under this instrument and shall be treated as having predeceased the grantor. My husband's older sister made a sound that wasn't quite a word. To be precise, the judge continued, looking up, the filing of this petition, if the petitioner is a named beneficiary, would trigger that provision automatically upon entry into the court record. My brother-in-law's lawyer turned the color of old milk. Because my brother-in-law was not just supporting the petition, he had filed it. His name was on the first line. You cannot intimidate a trust document. You cannot charm a no-contest clause into looking the other way. Your Honor, we would like to withdraw the petition at this time. We were acting on. The petition has been entered into the record, the judge said. You may submit a motion to withdraw. I will consider it. But what is filed is filed. My mother-in-law's composure cracked for just a second. She looked at me the way she had looked at me at my husband's funeral, when she pulled me aside near the coat closet and told me the house had always been meant to stay in the family. Her family, not mine. I looked back at her the same way I had looked at her then, patient, still, waiting. The trap had already snapped shut. They were the ones who'd said it. There's a particular silence that follows the word irrevocable in a courtroom. It's the silence of people doing math they don't like the answer to. My brother-in-law's attorney was conferring with him in urgent whispers. My mother-in-law had her hand pressed flat against the table like she was trying to keep it from rising. The younger sister had stopped using the tissue. Her face had the blank, scalded look of someone who has just been told a rule she didn't know existed and cannot unknow. I leaned back in my chair and watched them process it. And as I watched my mother-in-law's jaw tighten, I was somewhere else entirely. I was 29 years old and standing in my own kitchen, still in my work clothes, with the casserole dish in my hands and a smile I hadn't had to manufacture yet. My husband had just told his mother we were engaged. She had called 20 minutes later to congratulate him. She hadn't asked to speak to me. I told myself it was just her way. I told myself that a lot over the next 6 years. I was the wrong kind of background for her son. She had never said this out loud, which I think she believed gave her deniability. But she said it in the way she addressed holiday cards, his name alone, no and family. She said it in the way she would talk about his first serious girlfriend, a girl named something delicate and old-fashioned, in front of me at Thanksgiving, while I passed the mashed potatoes and smiled until my face ached. She said it in the way she called the house the Alderton House, as though my surname, which I had taken proudly and legally on our wedding day, somehow didn't count. My husband saw it. He wasn't oblivious. He would catch my eye across the table and give me the small, private look that meant, I know, I'm sorry, you are the best person in this room. And then after, in the car, he would hold my hand on the center console, and we would drive home in a silence that was entirely different from the one at his mother's table. Comfortable, ours. But he also grew up with her. He had absorbed, somewhere deep in his framework, the understanding that when it came to his mother, you managed. You did not confront. You managed. So I managed. For 6 years I managed the Christmas mornings where his sisters got earrings and I got a scented candle. I managed the way she called the house the property when she talked about it with her friends, as though it were inventory. I managed the way she referred to our miscarriage, the only one we ever told anyone about, as that difficult time, and never once said my name in the same sentence. And then my husband got sick. Pancreatic cancer is fast. That's the word doctors use when they're trying to prepare you for something they cannot soften. Fast. We had 8 months from diagnosis to the afternoon in November when I sat beside his bed and held his hand and he was still and finally, mercifully, no longer in pain. During those 8 months, I moved into caretaker mode so completely that I stopped being a person in my own right. I learned how to manage a PICC line. I learned how to talk to insurance adjusters without crying and how to cry in the car in the hospital parking garage where no one could hear me. I slept in 4-hour increments. I memorized his medication schedule the way other people memorize song lyrics. His mother came twice. His sisters came for a long weekend in August and spent most of it on the porch talking to each other. During that August weekend, I heard his older sister say something to his mother in the kitchen. I wasn't supposed to hear it. I was coming down the hallway and they didn't know I was there. She's already been looking at financial advisors, his sister said. I saw emails on the printer. I had been looking at financial advisors because my husband had asked me to, because he wanted to make sure I was protected, because he was still, even then, trying to take care of me. I stood in the hallway for a moment. Then I turned around and went back upstairs. 3 weeks later, my husband and I sat down with an estate planning attorney and a representative from Meridian Trust. We spent 4 hours going through every asset we had. My husband was exhausted by the end. He slept for most of the next day. But when he woke up, he told me he felt lighter. "They can't touch it now," he said. He meant it as relief. I took it the same way. The woman in the navy pantsuit was still at the clerk's desk when I came back to the present. She was submitting additional documents, methodical and unhurried, like someone completing a task she had done 1,000 times. "Your Honor," my brother-in-law's lawyer tried again, his voice stripped of its earlier confidence. "We would like to request a continuance to review the trust documentation. Our client was not aware of the full scope. Your client filed an emergency petition alleging elder financial abuse and asset misappropriation." The judge's voice was not unkind. It was just exact. "That is a serious allegation. The trust documentation has now been entered into the record. We are going to proceed." He looked at the woman from Meridian Trust. "Does the trustee have evidence relevant to the administration of the trust and the competency of the grantor at the time of execution?" She nodded. "We do, Your Honor." She reached into the tote bag again. The bag, I had to admit, was doing remarkable work. "I am submitting as Exhibit B a complete administrative log maintained by the Trust Department from the date of execution to the date of the grantor's death. This log includes all communications between the grantor and the trust officers, all instructions issued, and all disbursements made." She paused. "I am also submitting as Exhibit C a certified neuropsychological evaluation completed by Dr. Taftamin Dest Farouk Nassar of OSU Medical Center, performed 9 days prior to the trust amendment. Dr. Nassar found the grantor to be fully oriented with intact executive function and decision-making capacity. The evaluation was conducted at the grantor's request." My husband had made that appointment himself. He had driven himself to it. He had not told his mother. "Additionally," she continued, "Exhibit D is a video recording of the trust signing meeting per our standard protocol for estates of this size. The grantor is on camera, responsive, and articulate. At one point, he is asked directly whether he feels any pressure from any individual to make particular estate decisions." She looked at the judge. "He says, and I am quoting from the transcript, 'The only pressure I feel is to make sure my wife is taken care of because she has given up more than she should have had to, and the people who should have been helping haven't been.'" The room was very quiet. My brother-in-law looked at the table. My mother-in-law did not look at me. She stared at the middle distance with the focused expression of someone willing themselves not to react. My husband's younger sister was crying for real this time. I could tell the difference. "Your Honor," my brother-in-law's lawyer sounded like he was speaking from very far away. "In light of this documentation, we respectfully withdraw our characterization of." "You filed a petition alleging that the respondent committed financial elder abuse," the judge said. "He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. That your attorney characterized as systematic looting. Those words are in the record. The trust documentation, the evaluation, and the video recording directly contradict every material claim in your petition." He folded his hands. "I am denying the emergency petition. I am also ordering a sanctions hearing to address whether this filing constituted bad faith litigation." My brother-in-law stood up. His lawyer grabbed his arm. She isolated him. His voice cracked at the edges. She kept him from his family. He was sick, and she used that too. "Sit down, sir." He sat down. The woman from Meridian Trust returned to the chair beside me and set her tote bag on the floor. She didn't look triumphant. She just looked like someone who had done her job. I thought about the week before my husband died, when his mother had called asking if they could come. My husband had been sleeping 18 hours a day by then. He woke up for a few hours in the afternoon, usually just lucid enough to watch an episode of something familiar and hold my hand. I had told her that was a hard week and we would let her know. She had called back 2 days later and said she felt she was being excluded from her son's final days. I had held the phone against my chest for a moment and breathed. Then I had put it back to my ear and said, "I'll let him know you called when he wakes up." My husband had heard. He was awake. He looked at me from the bed and gave a small, slow shake of his head. That was all. No explanation needed. I put the phone down. They came to the funeral. They stood in the front row. They received condolences. His mother cried with the practiced fluency of someone who had always known how to make grief work for her, and I stood beside her because that was the right thing to do, and I held it all in because the grief I was carrying had nowhere to go in that room that would not be taken from me. Afterward, at the reception at the house, my mother-in-law had walked through the rooms with a slow, proprietary attention, touching things. The sideboard my husband and I had picked out together in Granville, the framed print in the hallway. She paused at the bookshelf in the study and said to her daughter, loudly enough for me to hear from the kitchen doorway, "He would have wanted the house to stay in the family." I had closed the kitchen door and stood at the sink for a moment. Then I opened the cabinet, got out a glass, filled it with water, and drank it. That was 4 months before the petition. Outside the courthouse, in the parking lot, the afternoon had turned cold and particular, the kind of November gray that is its own kind of beautiful if you are not in the middle of something. My sister-in-law, the younger one, the one who had cried, caught up with me at my car. "I want you to know," she said, "that I didn't agree with this. I told them not to do it." I looked at her. She had her father's eyes, which were also my husband's eyes. It hit me somewhere soft, which I had not expected. "I know you didn't file it," I said. "I still should have done more to stop it." I didn't answer that. There was no easy answer. What she should have done was say something loudly and early and keep saying it. Whether that was possible in the family she'd grown up in was a question above my pay grade. "He talked about you all the time," she said, "even at the end. He called me in September when he was having a hard week. He told me the only thing that made it okay was knowing you were going to be fine, that he'd made sure." My throat closed. I nodded. "She's going to fight it," my sister-in-law said. She meant her mother. "She's going to find another angle. She doesn't stop." "I know," I said, "but there's nothing left to fight. It's done." I got in my car. My brother-in-law was across the lot, standing next to his attorney, talking on a phone, and even from 50 feet away, I could see the stiffness in his shoulders, the particular way a person holds himself when he has made a very expensive mistake and is trying to calculate what it means. He had the inheritance already half spent in his head. I knew this because he had told my husband at a family dinner the year before my husband got sick that when the house eventually transferred, he planned to sell it and use his share to fund a business venture he'd been developing. He had said this at the dinner table in front of everyone while my husband was sitting right there, alive and 43, as though my husband were already a line item to be managed. My husband had looked at me across the table. I had pressed my foot against his under the tablecloth. Neither of us said anything. You managed. 3 months later, we had our appointment at Meridian Trust. I pulled out of the parking lot without looking back. The trustee called on a Thursday morning, 6 weeks after the hearing. I was at my desk at work, staring at a spreadsheet, and when her name came up on my phone, I set down my coffee and stepped into the hallway. "The court entered the final order this morning," she said. "The petition has been dismissed with prejudice. The sanctions hearing is scheduled for February. Based on the evidence submitted, the judge has referred the matter to the State Bar for review of counsel's conduct." I leaned against the wall. Okay. The no contest provision has been deemed triggered. Your brother-in-law's beneficial interest has been formally forfeited. The distribution timeline for the trust assets is now clear. We'll be in touch with specific dates. And the house? The deed transfer will process within 30 days. A pause. It's yours. It was always yours. I stood in the hallway for a moment after we hung up. Someone walked past me with a coffee. A phone rang in one of the offices. The ordinary world kept its ordinary rhythm. I thought about the last morning my husband had felt well enough to sit outside. It was early October, 3 weeks before the end, and we had sat on the back porch with coffee and a blanket across his lap, watching the yard in the way people watch things they know they are going to miss. He had looked at the oak tree in the far corner, the one he'd planted from a sapling when we moved in, and said he was sorry he wouldn't see it get bigger. I had told him it was already big. He'd laughed. It was a small laugh, tired but real. I went back to my desk and opened my email. There were 3 messages from my mother-in-law, sent over the past month, which I had read once and not answered. I read them again now. The first was composed and formal, suggesting we discuss the matter as a family. The second, sent a week later, was longer and contained the phrase, "what your husband would have wanted," which she deployed like a blade, and I had learned to recognize at distance. The third was brief. It just said she hoped I understood that this wasn't over. I opened a 4th window and composed a single response to all 3. I have nothing to add to what the court has already said. Please direct any future legal correspondence to Meridian Trust. I sent it. Then I opened my contacts, found her entry, and deleted it. I deleted my brother-in-law's. I sat with my older sister-in-law's name for a moment, the one who had stood in the front row at the funeral and touched the sideboard, and I deleted that one too. The younger one I kept. I don't know if that was the right call. Maybe she didn't do enough to stop it. Maybe none of us did enough for each other in the particular years that mattered. But she had called me in October, 2 weeks after the hearing, and said she had found a box of my husband's college photos in her storage unit and asked if I wanted them. I had driven over the next Saturday, and she had made coffee, and we had sat at her kitchen table and gone through them one by one, and she had told me stories I hadn't heard about summers before I knew him, about the person he was when he was 19, and everything was still open. I had cried. She had let me, without trying to fix it or fill the silence. That felt like something worth keeping. The oak tree in the backyard was bare now, November gray, its branches clean against the sky. I could see it from the kitchen window in the mornings when I made coffee. My husband had planted it the spring we moved in. He had dug the hole himself in the clay-heavy Ohio soil, and he had come in afterward with dirt on his knees and the satisfied look of a man who has done something that will outlast him. He knew what he was doing. He usually did. The house was mine. The tree was growing, and the people who had spent years looking at both of them like they were inventory they were owed, they were gone. I poured my coffee. I stood at the window. I was fine. There's something I keep coming back to even now. It's not the courtroom. It's not the moment the judge read the no contest clause out loud. It's a Tuesday afternoon, 14 months before any of that happened, when my husband and I sat in a glass-walled office and signed our names, and on the way out, he squeezed my hand and said, "They won't see it coming." He was smiling. He already knew he was dying, and he was smiling because he had done something good and careful and right for someone he loved. That's what I think about when people talk about strength. Not the dramatic kind, not the kind that makes noise in a courtroom. The quiet kind. The kind that shows up years before it's needed and does the work without an audience. My husband knew what was coming, not just the illness, but the people. He had watched his family his whole life. He understood exactly who they were when something valuable was on the table, and instead of pretending otherwise, instead of hoping they would rise to the occasion, he made a plan. He sat down with an attorney and a trust officer, and he thought it through, every clause, every contingency, every way they might try to take what wasn't theirs. He did it while he was exhausted and in pain, and he did it because he loved me and because he was honest about the world he actually lived in, not the one he wished he had. That's not cynicism, that's integrity. Knowing who people are and making decisions accordingly, without bitterness, without drama, just clear-eyed and prepared. I spent years in that family managing, smiling at the wrong dinners, passing the potatoes while someone talked about his first girlfriend at the table where I was sitting. I absorbed it because I thought that was what you did, that the cost of belonging was a certain amount of quiet erasure. I was wrong. The cost of that kind of belonging is too high, and what you get in return is not belonging at all. It is just permission to stay in the room. What I know now is that the real protection was never the trust document, though the trust document mattered. The real protection was what my husband and I built together, the honesty between us. The way we talked about hard things, the fact that when his family showed us who they were, we both saw it clearly and made a plan instead of looking away. That took something from both of us. A willingness to be uncomfortable, a willingness to think past the version of events we wished were true. When the judge read the no contest clause, my brother-in-law lost his share of the estate, but he had lost something else much earlier, something that can't be recovered in any court. He spent years treating his brother like a future asset and his brother's wife like an obstacle. Whatever relationship he might have had, with my husband, with me, with a family he could have been part of, he traded that away a long time ago for a calculation that didn't even pan out. That is its own kind of outcome, not punishment handed down from somewhere, just consequence, moving at its own pace, arriving exactly when it was always going to. I kept the younger sister's number, not because she was perfect, because she showed up to do the hard thing, sit with me at her kitchen table, and tell me stories about the man I loved. That took something. It was a small act of courage in a family where courage had not been especially valued, and I think it mattered more than she knew. The oak tree in the backyard is still growing. My husband planted it the spring we moved in the hard Ohio clay, on his knees in the dirt, with the satisfied look of someone doing something that will outlast them. He knew exactly what he was doing. He usually did. I think about that a lot, about what it means to build things that hold, not just legally, not just financially, but in the way you move through the world, with your eyes open, with a plan that comes from love, not fear, with enough patience to wait for the right moment and enough clarity to know it when it comes. He taught me that. The least I can do is keep living it.